Welcome to the Pro Wrestling Push Me Poll for March 1990. This is an objective ranking system based on who the biggest names in pro wrestling were in any given month, who was getting the biggest push in terms of big matches wrestled and championships held. March 1990 remained all about the build to WWF World Champion Hulk Hogan versus Intercontinental Champion The Ultimate Warrior at WrestleMania 6 next month in the Ultimate Challenge match, with the two of them signing the official match contracts on a primetime TV special for their historic title versus title match, which was incidentally a really weird piece of TV, which I'll try to put a link to in the description. The two of them sitting in President Jack Tunney's office across the desk from each other with their lawyers, both kind of intensely snarling at each other. Anyway, Hogan's ranked number 1 this month, Warrior's ranked number 2, and these two are our A-plus players for March. As a side story to that build, Hogan was attacked on Superstars by the duo of Dino Bravo and Earthquake, Earthquake being Hogan's apparent next title challenger and making his debut in this month's top 10 at number 10. And Hogan got hit with an Earthquake splash, with Warrior making the save for Hogan this time. In a reversal of last month, Hogan did not appreciate the rescue from Earthquake by Warrior this time, and tensions continued to simmer between the WWF's top two faces ahead of their impending big showdown next month. Elsewhere in the WWF, Jake the Snake Roberts, ranked number 8 this month, versus Million Dollar Man Ted DiBiase continued to be the company's number 2 feud heading into WrestleMania 6. And in a side story to that, the Big Boss Man, ranked surprisingly high at number 5 this month, had turned face and allied himself with Jake against the Million Dollar Man when Boss Man refused to take DiBiase's bribe to take out Jake for him in a good little angle, which saw Boss Man split from both his manager Slick and his Twin Towers partner Akeem to give Jake DiBiase's $1 million belt back instead. And after turning face on Superstars, Boss Man was absolutely everywhere in March, quite often partnering up with Hogan on the house show circuit in tag matches against Mr. Perfect and the Genius. Face and heel turns were still relatively rare and definitely meaningful in early 1990s WWF. And honestly, to me, it was kind of a weird decision to turn Boss Man face at this point. Yes, he'd kind of run his course as a heel, but the roster in early 1990 was very stacked towards top-line good guys already. You had Hogan, you had Warrior, you had Jake, all as main event level faces. Add in Roddy Piper and Dusty Rhodes to that group, even though they were both starting to wind down as full-timers at this point. Maybe Hacksaw Jim Duggan still at a push, and that's 6 to 7 main event level faces. On the heel side, you only really had Randy Savage and Ted DiBiase at that similar, consistent, established main event level. Andre the Giant was barely mobile at this point and close to retirement, even though he was one half of the Colossal Connection tag team champions alongside Haku. Earthquake, to be fair, they were trying to push up to that level. Mr. Perfect had been getting there, but kind of had the legs cut off from underneath him after getting dominated by Hogan over the last few months. And Rick Rude, they hadn't quite tried to reheat just yet. So in short, the star power in the WWF was very, very biased towards faces rather than heels at this point already, which would start to cause problems next month, as we'll see in terms of having a balanced card. But anyway, for whatever reason, Boss Man was turned face as well, and it was a pretty big deal at the time. Boss Man had been one of Hogan's primary heel opponents just last year, so he had main event credibility. Then they gave him that awesome Hard Times theme song by Survivor's Jimmy Jameson, which also contributed to instantly making him one of the most over faces in the roster. So yeah, WWF, very stacked roster of good guys at this point. Then you look at the NWA, and they had almost the opposite problem during this time period: too many heels and a lack of credible good guy challengers. NWA World Champion Ric Flair, ranked number 4 this month, had survived his pay-per-view match against US Champion Lex Luger last month at WrestleWar, after Luger, who's ranked number 7 for March, as his hastily assembled program against Flair continued, had opted to save the injured Sting from a Horseman attack at ringside rather than win the match, turned himself face again in the process to fill the gap left by Sting's knee injury, which was going to keep him out for a significant period of time, because there was literally no one else in the company credible enough to main event against Flair at this point in time. So the NWA was very much in a holding pattern with the Flair-Luger program, while Sting tried to rehab his leg, and things were just as fraught behind the scenes in the NWA as they were in front of the camera, as Flair was apparently asked to drop the world title to Luger in Chicago at a house show that they brought TV cameras to, but refused to do so unless he was granted a contract release in return, which TBS executive Jim Herd allegedly refused to grant him. So Flair remained NWA World Champion for another month, but was clearly not happy with its direction. We talked last month about Flair resigning from the WCW booking committee after run-ins with Jim Herd, Flair feeling that Herd wasn't showing him due respect and just pushing for someone, anyone, Sting, Luger, whoever, to just get the belt off Flair and try something new to turn things around. Look, Flair had carried the NWA on his back for years at this point and was justifiably feeling pretty disrespected, and had apparently, depending on who you believe, had preliminary soundings with the WWF about a possible jump for a much touted dream showdown against Hulk Hogan, hence his request for a contract release. But Jim Herd also apparently didn't want to be the sucker who enabled a possible Hogan-Flair match to come to fruition for the opposition. So the two parties were left in this unhappy stalemate. And it wasn't just Flair that was unhappy either. This month, Jim Cornette also resigned from the WCW booking committee after plans to have the Midnight Express join up with Flair and Arn in the Four Horsemen were nixed, which incidentally would have been an awesome iteration of the Horsemen and remains another one of wrestling's big what-ifs. But yeah, unhappy times in the NWA, both in front of the cameras and behind them. All Japan Triple Crown champion Jumbo Tsuruta comes in at number 3 for March, as AJPW held one of their big quarterly Budokan Hall shows in March, where Tsuruta defended his Triple Crown belts against Barry Windham, who was between runs in the WWF and returning to the NWA, in a sanctioned title defense, and teamed with Akira Taue against a range of various opponents in tag matches throughout the month as well. In at number 6 for March, Dr. Death Steve Williams and Terry Bam Bam Gordy formed what would become the legendary Miracle Violence Connection tag team, and defeated Stan Hansen and Genichiro Tenryu to win the All Japan World Tag Team titles in a great little match that I'm also naming as my match of the month for March, which I'll post a link to in the video description. Williams and Gordy completely isolate Tenryu in the match and work over his leg, while Hansen gets increasingly frustrated on the apron, Tenryu failing to make the tag on a number of occasions until Williams and Gordy win the tag team belts, and Hansen gets so pissed that he attacks his own partner and beats the shit out of Tenryu with his cowbell, to the extent Tsuruta comes back out to make the save, but Tenryu's having none of that sympathy and shoves Jumbo away to set up their next match. Good stuff from All Japan this month to close out their Excite Series tour. And finally, rounding out the top 10 at number 9 is New Japan's IWGP champion Big Van Vader, who makes the top 10 despite not wrestling any matches at all this month after his eye got knocked out of its socket during last month's brutal match against Stan Hansen at the Tokyo Dome. He still more than deserves retaining his place in the top 10, partly just out of the points accrued for being the IWGP champion, while New Japan was riding a wave of goodwill and popularity after last month's massive Tokyo Dome show, but also because that match and the way he continued it after such a gruesome injury massively increased his status and respect, both with fans and within the industry. Vader had been booked as a legit badass monster in Japan over the past year, and it was now patently clear to absolutely everyone that Vader was a legit badass monster too, and his legend would only grow from here. In Vader's place at the top of the New Japan card, while he underwent facial surgery and all bubbling just under the top 10 this month, Riki Choshu and IWGP Tag Team Champions Masa Saito and Shinya Hashimoto were pushed strongly as the faces of the company during March's Big Fight Series tour, often going up against Bam Bam Bigelow as the company's other big tough foreigner. And Jushin Thunder Liger was also still IWGP Junior Heavyweight Champion. I actually just want to touch on foreigners, or gaijins as they're known in Japan, wrestling in Japan for a moment. When I was a kid and the Western wrestling magazines didn't really cover Japan, often wrestlers would just disappear for months on end and then reappear again sometime later. And it turns out a lot of times they were touring Japan. We just didn't necessarily hear much about it at the time. For example, in the first quarter of 1990, in addition to Hansen, Williams and Gordy, All Japan hosted Ivan Koloff, Barry Windham, the British Bulldogs, Abdullah the Butcher, the Fantastics, Dan Spivey, Dustin Rhodes, the Can-Am Connection, Dan Croffett and Doug Furnas, Rip Rogers, David Sammartino and others. And New Japan, in addition to Vader and Bigelow, were hosting Kokina, who is the future Yokozuna, Scott Hall, Brad Ringens, Owen Hart, Tracy Smothers, Chris Benoit, John Nord and others, including a tall young ginger chap called Punisher Dice Morgan, who'd be The Undertaker by the end of the year. Anyway, slightly niche cul-de-sac. I just find it super interesting to know which Western wrestlers were doing Japanese tours back then. And that's before we've got to Puerto Rico, where Harley Race, Manny Fernandez, and Chris and Mark Youngblood were plying their trade in early 1990. Anyway, niche Japanese foreign worker cul-de-sac. Anyway, bubbling under the March top 10, New Japan's Masa Saito was improbably holding the AWA World title after beating Larry Zbyszko last month at the Tokyo Dome. Jerry the King Lawler regained the USWA title, his fifth reign at this point, from the Boogie Woogie Man Jimmy Valiant, although weirdly Valiant's reign was only recognised in the Memphis branch of the USWA, not the Von Erich Dallas branch, which was an early sign that all was not entirely aligned in the USWA, following last year's merger of the Memphis-based CWA and Dallas-based world-class promotions to form the USWA, but more on that unravelling relationship later in 1990. In the number 5 ranked North American promotion, the Pacific Northwest, Curtis Thompson was PNW champion, while the Juice Patrol, Beetlejuice, Art Barr and Big Juice JW Storm won the vacant Pacific Northwest tag team titles. And south of the border, EMLL was back in the Arena Mexico, with Rayo de Jalisco Jr., Angela Azteca, El Dandy and Solomon Grundy as the top Technicos this month, and Jerry Estrada, Fabuloso Blondie and the Polizia de Los Angeles tag team, the main Rudos. So that's your March 1990 Pro Wrestling Push Me Pull Top 10, plus some of the wider landscape and context underneath it. Thanks for listening, and see you next time for April, which was definitely the busiest wrestling month of the year, featuring 2 of the biggest 3 shows of the year, WrestleMania 6 from Toronto and the US-Japan Wrestling Summit from Tokyo, which was an absolutely bizarro world supercard, co-promoted by the WWF, All Japan and New Japan, featuring Hulk Hogan, Ultimate Warrior, Stan Hansen, Jumbo Tsuruta and Jushin Liger all on one batshit crazy card, which would never ever be repeated for a whole host of reasons that we'll get into next time. So please like and subscribe, check out the video links to some of the things discussed in the description, and see you next time to talk about April 1990. Cheers!